Okay, that was a rhetorical question, of course. I wanted everybody to say strongly agree, and hopefully after the next two practice Kahoot quizzes, people will see the relationship between completion of these tests and their performance in the assessments, the quizzes that count towards your final mark. I shall keep nagging you about this. So I'll start with the word cloud. We went through a number of characteristics of a commodity if it's to serve well as money. Just type in any characteristic you can remember. Okay, so durability, portability, uniformity, these are the key characteristics of a commodity if it's to serve well as money. So at the start of the presentation on Sunday, we listed half a dozen different characteristics, and sometimes what might work well at one time may not work quite as well in another period. So one of the answers here is being valuable. Well, if you live at the coast, shells on the shore are not of great value, but they may be to somebody that lives inland. So with the passage of time, with human development, as people travel, what may have served well as money in the past may not serve well as money in the future. Okay. So we talked about characteristics. We also talked about 4 functions of money. Can you remember what they are? Type one of those functions. Okay, I think we've got them all there. Medium of exchange is probably the most important function. Store of value, also important, as is a unit of account. One that isn't listed, and maybe it's because there weren't enough characters for you to type it in, but a standard for deferred payments is another one which is kind of linked to the unit of account one. Okay, well done. So, first of the quiz questions coming up. Okay, very good. I think most of you picked that up. Intuitively, it's the purchase of a bond. A bond is a security. It could be a government bond, it could be a corporate bond, some kind of savings vehicle, and that means that you are storing away your wealth. You don't store your wealth when you buy groceries because you consume your groceries within a week or so. You don't have wealth on a credit card bill because that's actually a liability rather than an asset. I guess if you bought a particularly rare pair of Levi jeans from 1976 or something, it might have some special value which you could look upon as being an investment which you could sell online a few years from now and make a lot of money. But really the best answer here is the purchase of a government bond, or any other bond for that matter. Liquidity, we've talked about that today. What does it refer to? Okay, so the majority, if you got that correct as well. The rate at which money is spent, I mean, that's worth noting that there can be a higher level of liquidity in the economy. There's plenty of cash available. You can get a loan very easily. You might have cash sitting in your bank account, but that doesn't necessarily mean you spend it. Okay, this is one of the concerns we're facing right now, is that people will be more cautious and maybe will defer any spending plans. This is what the governments around the world are trying to convince us. They're going to try and convince us otherwise. The ease with which money can be converted into a time deposit. Well, a time deposit is a fixed term deposit. It may be you put some money in a savings account for 6 months or a year and you agree not to touch it. So that's not very liquid at all. And of course, a government security is pretty much of a illiquid asset. So most of you got the idea there. Well done. Well, quite a few of you are out there, haven't I? So, credit cards are not money. They're token money in the sense that you are spending money that you don't actually have, or at least you're not paying back. At this point in time, you may draw down your stock of money to pay a credit card bill sometime in the future, but it's not money. Debit card is in and of itself pretty worthless. It's just a tool. It's an instrument that allows you to access your money. So we have to be very careful here. Money in its most liquid form, notes, coins, and deposits. You can use your debit card to tap on a cash machine to buy goods, but the debit card itself is not money. It's just the means through which you access your money. Interesting. Just a few of you got that one right. Okay, I suspected that might cause you to think a fair bit about it. This is getting into the more technical stuff now. But reserves, required reserves, this is one of the ways in which the central bank in an economy can influence the ability of commercial banks to make loans, to create credit. Okay, and they will require banks, everybody has to observe this law, every bank will have to observe this rule, that they must keep a certain proportion of their total deposit liabilities in the form of reserves to meet the demands of their depositors. Okay, so not everybody is going to come to the bank on the same day and draw out their money. Banks know this from experience, but they must keep some reserves in the most liquid form to meet this particular risk. Okay, so we call this the required reserve ratio, and it's a fraction of total deposits. So that's why that is the correct answer. A lot of you went for the blue one, the ratio of loans to total deposits. Well, that is what they will, loans is what we call the excess reserves. So let's just say required reserves were 10%. That means that 90% of a new deposit could be loaned out. Okay, so that would be the excess reserves as opposed to the required reserves. Okay, so a bit of a spread here, and the most popular answer was raising interest rates. Well, not really. That's something that banks can do to encourage people to save, right? So if one of the local banks were to offer, a 1 percentage point higher on people's savings, then that would actually, if anything, reduce the quantity of money circulating in the economy. If people put some cash in the bank in a fixed term deposit. Okay, so the correct answer is making loans, and it's this. I mean, even after all these years of learning about economics and teaching economics, it still amazes me how much authority banks have to create money. It's just the result of a conversation between you and your bank manager or some kind of relationship manager in the bank, and say, look, I want to go on a long family holiday to Europe. Can I take out a personal loan to finance the trip over 2 years? And I want to borrow this amount at this rate of interest, and I'll pay this amount back per month. And if that person agrees, you go home, you turn on your computer, and all of a sudden there's this large sum of money sitting in your bank account that you didn't have before. Where did it come from? Well, it came from the computer keyboard of the bank manager who said, yep, I approve this loan. And banks essentially manufacture, they create credit, they create money by making loans. Okay, read this carefully. I suspected this would happen, that some of you go for 2,500. Just to review the question again, we've got the reserve ratio of 20%. So the money multiplier is going to be the reciprocal of 20%, so it's 1 divided by 20%, or 0.2. 1 divided by 0.2 is 5, so the money multiplier is 5. So if we're talking about the total money supply, then it's going to be 5 times 500, okay? And the question is saying, what is the amount of money that can potentially be created, right? Well, $500 is already in existence. So the total money supply in this particular institution, its contribution to the total money supply will be 2,500 in total, including the 500 initial deposit. So the answer is this one. Just be careful when you read these questions. This is the additional credit that's created rather than the total amount. Quick true or false. The answer is indeed false. Can anybody tell me what year the Central Bank of UAE was founded? Well done, 1980. So it's been around for a long time, not long after the formation of the United Arab Emirates. You need a central bank. If you're to be a nation state, it's almost a non-negotiable, not almost, it is a non-negotiable prerequisite. You have to have some monetary authorities if you're to have a stable economy. All right, so without question, the central bank is the authority that has most influence over the money supply. It may not manage it completely, but that's one of its main functions. It is the banker to the banks. Okay, so every bank in the country will have an account with the Reserve Bank where they will keep some of their reserves, not all, but some of their reserves will be with the central bank. It is the lender of last resort in the sense that if a bank were to get itself into trouble, where there's a risk of the bank failing, that's something that is not palatable. You do not want banks failing because it will reverberate around the economy. So that's another important role of the central bank. So the correct answer is profiting from open market operations. In fact, unless there is an exception that I don't know about, central banks do not make profits. Right? They are there purely as an institution, an independent institution that helps with the smooth operation of the economy. To the extent that there is any profit making, and there will always be some residual profit. For example, the reserve banks, the central banks around the world, can charge interest on loans they make to banks overnight to make sure that they're meeting their reserve requirements. Any residual profit is paid to the governments, whichever governments we're talking about. But central banks are not commercial banks. They're not in the business to make profit. Amna, you're correct. Open market operations is a tool of the central bank. It will, that's one of their primary tools of monetary policy. The three tools being changing the official interest rate, manipulating required reserves, and open market operations. And these days, it's engaging in open market operations in a big way. Open market purchases and repurchases in particular, where they're buying up government securities and indeed all other kinds of securities in the marketplace to pump some liquidity into the system. So open market operations, open market purchase in particular, is a very important tool right now in the context of quantitative easing, right, to try and keep the economies afloat, try and encourage banks to use this excess liquidity to make loans to people at competitive rates so that they can reflate the economy. But this is not something that they profit from. Okay, so the most popular answer was the correct answer. Remember, I've mentioned this a few times, but I'll just say it one more time. Whilst there's a very close relationship between a government and the central bank, I mean, they are partners really in the management of the economy. The central bank will essentially operate independently. There'll be collaboration, there'll be discussions between the central bank and the Treasury Department in a particular government, but they are separate entities, and the issuer of government securities is the government. All right, so that's not a responsibility of the central bank, and even if it were the responsibility of the central bank, this is not a tool of monetary policy. So the three main tools of monetary policy are open market operations, whether they're sales of securities or purchases, repurchases, manipulation of the official interest rate, the base rate at which banks can borrow from the central bank, and by changing the reserve requirements. So the correct answer here is the red answer, issuing of government securities, is done by the government, not the bank. Ceteris paribus, all things being equal. Okay, so a lot of you went for the blue one, which is maintain a neutral monetary policy stance. Well, if you've got high unemployment, and a few of you would have had a situation in the monetary policy game on Sunday, and one way in addressing the problem of high unemployment, I mean, in the game they said that you should be aiming for 5% unemployment. And in order for you, if you went way above 5%, the way for you to get unemployment down would have been to reduce interest rates. Okay, so increasing the money supply, reducing the interest rates is a way of stimulating economic activity. You reduce interest rates, it's cheaper to borrow money, people are incentivized to take out loans to buy new cars, buy houses, go on foreign holidays. Economic activity will increase because people will borrow to invest in plant and machinery. So interest rates coming down, it's always going to have an expansionary effect on the economy. And if you've got high unemployment, then all being well, you'd expect that unemployment to come down with greater economic activity. Okay, so MV equals PY, money times the velocity of circulation is equal to the price level times output of goods and services. Okay, so we did that this morning. It's the MS curve, which of course is a bit of a misnomer. It's a vertical line, but if we increase the supply of money, it's a rightward shift in that curve. Okay, so once upon a time, bank opening hours would have had an impact on money demand, or at least the pattern of money demand, but not these days with technology, with the financial innovation of debit cards and ATM cards. All right, so unanticipated inflation. Okay, I was wondering whether this would catch a few people out. So let's just think this one through. So let's assume we're in Venezuela and the inflation rate is 1 or 2%, right? Things are normal. And then you take out a loan. Let's say you want to buy a house for $1 million. All right, so you go to the bank, you say, found a nice house to live in Caracas, and it's going to cost $1 million, and it'll be bolivars there, of course, but it's going to cost $1 million, and I'd like to borrow that money from the bank in order to buy this house. Okay, so you sit down, negotiate. There's a particular interest rate, maybe it's 4, 5, 6%. If there's low inflation, it probably wouldn't be any more than 7%. And you promise to pay the loan back over a period of 20 or 25 years. This is the normal thing. Okay, then things go really bad, and it's a complete shock to everybody. It's unanticipated inflation. But during the course of a year, inflation goes up from 2 or 3% to 1,000,000%. 1,000,000% per year. What that means is your debt of $1 million is essentially the equivalent in real terms of $1. Right? So if you were to do that, you took out a massive debt just before hyperinflation took hold in Venezuela. then you would have yourself a very nice house, a very nice apartment in Caracas, and you are, in real terms, you owe the bank $1. That's what it means. So if you're a debtor and all of a sudden inflation takes off, this is very good news. If you're a lender, you're the person doing the lending of the dollars, then what you get back for your loan, you loaned out $1 million. In real terms, what you get back is only worth $1 in terms of the goods it can buy. So this highlights the dangers of inflation. All right, so coming back to my Venezuelan bank example, if inflation shot up to 1,000,000%, I mean, that's just it's so extraordinary, it's beggars belief. But if institutions loaning money have had that experience of making loans and all of a sudden the goalposts shift because inflation's taken off and what they're going to get back in real terms is much less than they loan, then it makes them very reluctant to loan money for long periods in the future. They may say, okay, we'll loan you money for a year, or maybe even less than that, so they can be sure that the interest rate they set is going to accommodate any increase in inflation. All right, they'll be lifting nominal rates of interest in anticipation of inflation, but if they get it wrong, then they're going to lose out in real terms. Okay, so very few people, one person got this right. Let's understand why. So the question is asking, between what points on the graph is there a period of disinflation? So if we come from point A down this curve here, what we are experiencing here is disinflation until we get to this point here. All right, what you've got is still rising prices. Anywhere above this line here, you get any point on this part of the curve here, we still have inflation, positive inflation. So prices are still rising, albeit at a lower rate than they were previously. But then once you get past here, then you have deflation, right? Prices are still going up, albeit by a smaller and smaller amount. They get here, prices aren't going up or down. Once you get past here, prices fall. And this is a period of deflation, okay? So you go from B to C, you're having prices rising, so there's inflation. You go from C to D, we're talking about prices rising, so it's inflation. Going from D to E, that is the correct answer, disinflation. It's positive inflation, but it's falling inflation, and we use this word disinflation to talk about inflation rates that are declining. Right? So it's very important to distinguish between disinflation and deflation. Disinflation is a good thing, right? We want prices to come down, but not to the point where they go into negative inflation, right? Where prices actually fall, we get deflation, because that's equally as harmful as inflation. So be careful not to fall into that trap. Okay, so just following on from my previous comment, disinflation we're okay with, so long as inflation is above zero, preferably somewhere between 2 and 3%. That's actually a sign of a healthy economy. This is the inflation range most central banks around the world, that's the target range they have. It's somewhere between 2 and 3%, because that is showing that there's some activity in the economy. Okay, if prices fall, then all of a sudden everybody loses confidence. You know, producers don't know whether they're going to recoup their costs for producing goods and services. Consumers, they see prices falling and they say, oh, well, I will defer making purchases now because prices might fall further. And then you end up going into a bit of a tailspin. If I put a period of deflation is beneficial for a country in the short run, even that is a little bit dangerous. If you enter into a period of deflation and it becomes a protracted period of deflation, then the country has problems. So in the UAE, we have had deflation now for a few quarters. I would be confident, however, that because of the institutions we have in this country, this is something that is manageable. But some countries around the world, Japan, for example, has had long episodes of deflation, and nothing's been going on in the economy. I mean, fortunately, they're a developed country and a stable country, so they're able to cope with the problems that are created by deflation. But for emerging economies and less developed countries, this is not a place you want to go. So period deflation is not beneficial for a country at any time, particularly in the long run, because it could actually do permanent damage to the productive capacity of the economy. Okay, just a spelling test there, really. Hyperinflation, as opposed to hypo or hipper or hippo. Hyperinflation is the correct word we use. That picture, by the way, I was in Sierra Leone in West Africa late last year, and the Leone, which is the currency there, if you watch the video at the start of class as you were coming into the meeting room, you'll have noticed that over the last 20 odd years or so, Sierra Leone, which is one of the poorest countries on the planet, has had many experiences with hyperinflation. And even today, and it's in really good shape today, or at least before coronavirus, many people in Sierra Leone would rather use US dollars to execute their transactions rather than local currency because of rising prices. And I was there, and I went with US dollars and with pound sterling, and I was changing money on the street because that's where you could get the best rate of exchange. And I didn't have quite as much cash as this guy is holding in his arms here, but probably about a third of what he's holding was what I got when I exchanged 100 US dollars. Good. Well, a few of you picked up on my earlier explanation about buying a house for $1 million in Caracas a year ago. Definitely, if you've got hyperinflation and you've got debt, it's happy days. On the other hand, if you've got savings, it's terrible. So if you're, let's go back to the scenario of living in Venezuela when in days before the hyperinflation started, and let's just say you were just on the brink of retirement and you'd worked all of your life, you worked very hard, and maybe over your working life you'd managed to accumulate $1 million in savings. And then there you are, 65 years old, let's say, and within a year your life savings of $1 million is worth $1. Just imagine how you'd feel. For younger people, it's terrible because hyperinflation normally means that you're not getting access to good education, maybe not getting the right nutrition. You can actually have a damaging effect on your life moving forward. And if you're elderly and therefore on fixed incomes, maybe you're receiving a pension, all of a sudden drugs and essential food items become out of your price range because your income can't keep up with price changes. Okay, so no prizes there for getting that one right. I put this picture here. It's not a very good quality picture. There's a saying in the English language. I don't know whether there's an Arabic equivalent, but it's a saying that goes, "Money does not grow on trees," and it's a reference to the fact that there's a limit to how much money you can get to buy the things you need. And here is a tree in Caracas where people have just simply tagged banknotes to the tree, the bush or whatever it is, because it's worthless. So it just struck me as being mildly amusing, in case you were wondering what the picture was. Singapore and Germany are like super efficient in managing their economies, and are always likely to keep inflation under wraps, particularly the Germans. They are particularly sensitive to hyperinflation because of what happened in that country in the 1920s. And they, of all central banks, well, of course, these days it's the European Central Bank, but the Bundesbank, which was the German central bank when it was using the Deutschmark as opposed to the euro, was super strict, super conservative when it came to monetary policy. Singapore, the same, although Singapore is a bit more exposed because of its integration with the international economy. It's a relatively small economy, so it sometimes can import inflation if it's reliant upon goods from other countries where there is inflation. Okay, so we're getting near the end now, and this is question 24. Well done, most of you got that correct. I think, mindful of the time, we are at the end here. Looking at the scores, Shadow looks like she's going to get the gold today. Aisha silver, Amna in bronze, Alia and Latifa hot on their heels. I think the last question is just a poll, so let's just have a look. Oh no, one more question. One more question. Okay, I've put printing money in inverted commas there. It's more of a metaphor these days, given that we use digital money so much. But this is what is happening. Quantitative easing is the order of the day. It is the monetary policy instruments of choice of just about every central bank in the world affected by coronavirus. And they are flooding the financial system with funds in an effort to make credit cheap and get people borrowing and investing and consuming to keep the level of economic activity buoyant. Okay, so apologise for the false alarm. This is the final question coming up. It's a poll rather than a question. So well done to you 5 on screen here for your performance today. This is an opinion piece, I guess. What do you think? Yes, well, those of you who went for the green answer, no, not if it's managed effectively. I think that's what I think too. But it is possible. And I hate to say it, but when you've got leadership in the United States, as we currently have it, this is a priceless picture here. All the leaders of the world, you've got the French president, the German president, the Japanese leader there, and the stubbornness on this man's face. Unfortunately, he doesn't always play by the rules, does he? So there's no correct answer to this question. We'll just have to wait and see. But if we hope for the best, then I think the green option is the one that's going to be most significant. Okay. Final scores. I think I've already announced them. So Amna in bronze medal, well done. Aisha in silver. And this week's gold medal winner is Shada. Well done. Well done, all of you. And to Latifa and Fatma as well. I know a few of you are dropping out. It looked like there was a big mass exodus again. Clearly an internet problem in the particular region of Dubai somewhere. Anyway, that's all from me today. Anybody got any questions? If not,